It's already finished, which is advice I often give to students. Double major in two majors where a lot of the core classes overlap, you know, or at least the electives overlap. And then I took off a couple of years and just basically full-time painted graffiti and hustled and just, you know, raised hell all over the country, really. And then I ended up going to grad school at NYU. The group that I was a part of in my mid-20s, like after college, had a lot of attention from law enforcement, and I just knew that like they were going to hit us with some kind of big conspiracy, you know, case or, you know, step act or some shit. And so I decided, I actually had a choice between going to Irvine and NYU, and I decided to go to NYU because I figured if I go to Irvine, you know, I'm going to stay in LA, I'm going to get busted, you know.
Yeah.
I was just doing too much shit at that time. I had too much shit like hanging over me where I was like, at some point they're going to figure this shit out and I'm going to go down. So, and also like go to New York and paint graffiti.
Yeah,
you know, it's like, you know, and for PhD programs in the US, they pay you for that.
Yeah.
So like they pay your tuition, your health insurance, and then they give you a stipend. It was like 20 racks a year or something, like enough to pay rent at least, you know. And I always like would hustle, or I worked in like little odd jobs like at concert venues and, you know, things like that.
Okay. So what are you studying? Are you studying a PhD? So you didn't study law?
Yeah, no. So I went straight to a PhD program I actually applied to 6 law schools and 6 PhD programs.
Okay.
At the recommendation of one of the professors that was like one of my mentors at Santa Barbara. And I ended up going to NYU on his recommendation, actually. And the program there actually, you know, and most of the faculty, like what they research and stuff wasn't what I was interested in. But it's a tier 1 school, and the good thing is if you go to any school in New York, there's this thing called the consortium, and you can take classes at any school you want.
Okay, cool.
So I took advantage because like I had to take my core classes in my department, but my electives I could take in any department in the whole New York area.
So under the American system, you have to study a master's while you're studying the PhD or
no,
something like that?
it's soft sciences and hard sciences are somewhat different. Hard sciences, often you can do a separate master's and then do a PhD. Mm-hmm. But in social sciences particularly, typically the master's is within the PhD. It's called a terminal PhD.
Okay.
A terminal PhD program just means that like you get your master's along the way.
Okay.
And then you end up, you know, you finish with the PhD.
Okay.
So that's what I did there. You know, after you take your classes and your comps, then I think you can, you post the MA, and then you do your dissertation and get the PhD.
Okay.
So I lived in New York for 6 years. And my plan was actually to start the program, but then to switch. They had another program where you could do your PhD and your law degree.
Yeah.
So my plan was to just do 1 year of this, get these credits, and then take those credits to the other program and do a combined. But I kind of like, one thing is I was just like painting graffiti every fucking night. But also I just like, you know, I started to like be a little bit like curious about academics for the first time in my life. Like most of the stuff that you read in grad school is not something that you're interested in at all. But
yeah.
Sometimes there were some things that I would really like actually like pique my interest intellectually, you know.
And what were those?
I think it was Brotherton, David Brotherton, who's like really my primary mentor more than anyone else at CUNY Grad Center and John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Because, you know, they're in New York, it's part of the consortium. So I was just looking through different campuses' classes, like for, I don't know, social classes or crim classes or something, to see what classes there were out there that might be more interesting than what was being offered in my department. And I think David had like maybe like a gangs class or urban crime or...
And you took his class?
Yeah, so I think I ended up taking like 3 classes with him, and 2 of them were team taught with him and Jock Young.
So these were your first classes in critical criminology?
I mean, at that time I didn't know what critical criminology, I didn't know what criminology, I didn't know what nothing was. I was just a fucking shithead. Like, I was just painting graffiti all night and just taking my classes and reading what I was told to read and write what I was told to write. Yeah. But not really understanding, like, you know, the academics,
Yeah,
and
I
politics,
get
and
it.
how it's organized and everything.
Yeah.
So I was just like just following the fucking leader basically. But David is the one more than anyone who like got me, like kind of opened my eyes to like being intellectually curious. Like the things that I read with him were things that like made sense, and made sense based on my own experiences, and like all my homies like and friends, and like at that point I had traveled all over the country like painting graffiti and getting in fights and doing doing my thing and whatever. So like everything I had seen in the streets everywhere, like the stuff that I was reading and that he was talking about in his classes,
It
I was
resonated with you.
Yeah, I was like, wow, this is like the real shit right here,
Yeah.
So he became kind of an informal mentor to me. I kept taking my classes in my department, whatever I needed to do, but he would involve me, like he would invite me when they would have conferences over at John Jay. I think the first time I went to a real academic conference, I don't remember if it was ASA or ASC, it was in New York, and two famous professors that are critical criminologists and cultural criminologists, Jeff Farrell and Keith Hayward, came for the conference, and they were going to get a hotel room. But I think David, in those days it was normal like to meet professors and have a drink after class at the pub,
Yeah.
And so because all these other professors were in town for the conference, we met everyone at a bar after class one day, so I met them, and we were talking and stuff, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna get a hotel in this. I was like, fuck a hotel, come stay at my pad. Because like especially in the graffiti subculture, like you go to different cities to paint and you stay at someone else's pad that lives there, and then when they come to your city they stay at your pad. So it's kind of like an exchange program. Graffiti is. So I was accustomed to having house guests, so I was like, come on my pad, come on.
Yeah.
And I think Jeff Farrell is well known. His first book and like a lot of his publications are about graffiti, so he was hip to it too,
Yeah.
So
Was he a graffiti artist?
no, he wasn't actually a graffiti writer. I mean, he did write graffiti while he was doing his dissertation was on graffiti in Denver.
Okay.
And it's an anarchist analysis that went over my head at the time.
Yeah.
And now, of course, I appreciate very much, and I teach to my students. That probably goes over their head too. But he, because like we were talking about in class today, right? When you do ethnography, you have to immerse yourself in the community, right? You have to become a part of the community. You can't be some outsider that just pulls up, interviews people, and then takes off,
Yeah.
And so he would, the dudes that were painting graffiti that he was talking to, he would go with them and paint. He would first he would help them fill in or whatever, and you know what I mean? So he wasn't really a real graffiti writer, but he was going with them to the spots, watching out for them, the spots, helping them fill in, all that kind of stuff. So he knew about graffiti, and he knew who I was at the time. I'd been traveling the country painting graffiti, so I was really well known. So we just kind of clicked, and them talking to me also, and going to that conference with David and Jeff and Keith, and them introducing me to other professors that they were friends with, and also Jock. I was close to Jock because Jock and David were best friends, and two of the classes I took were co-taught by them, so I would always be with them. And Jock's wife, Jane.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just kind of there was a community of us there that we're all kind of like-minded, had similar perspectives, and many of us had similar experiences. So I don't know, it just kind of got me more interested and more curious in it. And I think the first time I presented at a conference, they invited me to present at a conference they had at CUNY Grad Center. So there were all these people, all these mentors that were kind of welcoming me into it. So that just the social acceptance and being welcomed, and then also them talking about things and writing about things, and me reading about things that actually were intellectually interesting to me, and so I think that's where my love for reading came from, is now like I read, I'm constantly buying books and reading books. I have a massive library and all that kind of stuff. And as an academic, like you can just many academics get by just like reading the little bit of literature in this subfield that they do, and then that's it, and they do their publications, and and that's it. But I read tons of stuff. I read stuff from totally different fields, and also like my writing interests are very wide as well. So I read, I'm interested in identity politics. My book is a pretty hard left critique of identity politics. And so, but if you want to critique people's identities, then you need to understand about nationalism, and you need to understand about the history of the race concept and the history of capitalism and all these different, wider macro social systems that have shaped and created the world that we live in today.
It's important that you mentioned this. So you talk about identity politics, and now you're in your postdoc.
But no, I never had a postdoc.
I mean, not a postdoc. Sorry,
in grad school.
Your PhD, your grad school, and you're learning all these concepts, and you relate them to your own life and your own experiences. You go back to that life. So after trying to leave Los Angeles, you go back to do your research, right?
Yeah, so for a PhD, you got to do your dissertation. You have to do some type of research nobody's ever done before. You need to figure out a topic. And at that time, there had really had been nothing written about interracial conflict between Black and Latino gangs.
But it was a big thing.
And in the streets that I grew up in, and in the prisons, it was a huge thing. I had a friend who was murdered.
But very underreported, yeah.
Yeah, I had a friend who was murdered as a result of an interracial, Black and Mexican gang beef, which I tell the narrative of his murder in the opening vignette of my book. So it was like something that was very like on my conscience growing up. And also we all expected to go to prison. And we all expected that when we get there that there would be all of this racial, violence, that we would have to participate in violence with, inmates of other racial groups and gang affiliations or whatever. So it was, something that was very pertinent in my own experience and my friends' experiences and stuff like that. But there really wasn't much written about it in academic literature. So I was like, cool, I'm going to write about this. But I didn't, I certainly hadn't done the research yet when I chose the topic, and I hadn't even, begun to conceive what my analysis would be.
Yeah.
I mean, at that time, I don't think I even really understood what a theory was.
Yeah.
Even though I'd probably finished my coursework at that time, I still was on very shaky ground, theoretically. So I came. I also hated living in New York. Fucking hate New York. I mean, there's a lot of nice people in New York that are my friends and that I think are great people.
Yeah.
But actually living there is miserable for me personally. I hated living there. I feel more at home here in Mexico than I do in New York by far. It's just like a different fucking planet.
Okay.
So I wanted to get the hell out of New York as soon as possible. So that was the other advantage of making this my dissertation topic. I would be able to come to LA.
So you would fly back and forth?
No, I moved. Once I was done with my coursework and my comps, then I just moved here.
Back to LA?
Yeah, permanently. Cool. And so I did, and then I actually didn't even really get to work. Like for a couple years, I was just working and trying to keep an apartment and like.
This is in 2010?
Not really getting anything done. This is, 20, let me think what year that would have been. 2009, something like that.
Okay.
I guess it must have been 2009 because I think I started in 2003, and I think I was in New York for.
So you can get an extension and continue to get paid?
No. Well, that was the other issue, is that like I had a certain number of years like paid for.
Which was 6?
I think it was 5 actually.
Oh wow.
So maybe it was.
Yeah, here we have only 4 years.
I can't remember. I'm old and it's been a long time. But I'm pretty sure I had 5 years funding. And I think I stayed longer than that with a friend. I don't remember what the fuck. But in any case, eventually I moved back here, presumably to finish my dissertation. But but I was just, for like 2 years, the first 2 years I was just working, I wasn't really getting anything done. And then I decided, fuck all this. I had a girlfriend that was a real drag on me at the time, whatever, and I ended up with a different girl who was more supportive, and I decided to I'm going to start actually doing this. So I, wrote up all my shit and started doing interviews and all that. And I ended up doing I think it was 97, over 100 interviews total, but
of different people?
97 gang members, and I think it was half a dozen or so law enforcement interviews, something like that. So I interviewed people from, different hoods, Crip, Blood, and Southsider, from all different parts of Los Angeles I could.
Okay.
And then I interviewed gang cops from different units in different jurisdictions. So I would ask to do a ride-along.
Yeah.
And then I would say, I'm a grad student, I'm researching gangs and this and that, can I do a ride-along? And then they would give me a ride-along with the gang cop, and then I would ask them for an interview afterwards. So I did half a dozen of those, something like that.
Okay.
So that's there's some quotes from cops in my book. That's where it comes from. It's from.
Did you ever notice, with being with gang members and then being with the police, did you ever notice similarities between both groups?
Yeah, I mean, cops and gang members are the same fucking people from the same neighborhoods and the same communities, and oftentimes from the same families.
I think that's something so important to note, because that's also something that I've ran into. Is that once you get to know. I mean, I never knew a cop in the United States spoke to them in a conversation, but once I came to Mexico, I did meet cops and military. And they're very similar,
Yeah.
So they create this brotherhood within their group.
It's the same shit.
Yeah.
They just have a badge. And we don't. Yeah, I actually know quite a few cops these days because, one of my hobbies is I'm a competitive shooter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I do. And actually the type of shooting I do is combat shooting. It's not shooting, bullseye from, 1,000 yards or
So
something.
do the cops...
So half the people that participate in the shooting sport are cops or military or something like that,
Yeah.
So a lot of my shooting buddies are cops. So it's actually interesting because on the shooting range where everybody's chilling, or after a match people go to the go and eat something and have a beer or whatever.
Yeah.
Hearing having conversations with and overhearing the conversations of cops that are real cops, speaking openly in an environment where they don't filter themselves, is pretty interesting, actually. And it's almost identical to gang members.
Yeah, it is.
They'd be bragging about shit they did, and also it's crazy. I don't know. It's I remember one time this cop who was actually ended up being a captain in his agency. I won't say, I don't snitch anybody out on any side.
Yeah.
What agency it was, but. He was telling the story about that some woman who was obviously a drug user was always fucking with him and spitting on him and hitting him with, throwing bottles at him and shit like that. And so he threw her in his car and beat her up. And he was laughing about it and shit. I was damn, that's fucked up. This dude beat up this old lady. It's everybody's laughing about it, So yeah, it's same macho, tattoos and carrying guns everywhere, and it's actually there's a theoretical basis for this, right, which we're going to teach in our class this semester.
What, hypermasculinity?
No, the Marxist criminology. There's this I think it was Spitzer. There's a series of publications in the 70s and kind of into the early 80s that we call Marxist criminology, and that are basically applying Marx's ideas to crime. And this guy, Steven Spitzer, wrote this article, and one of the things he talked about was that, basically Marx has this concept of the surplus labor population, that there's a permanently, that in a capitalist society, you're always going to have an unemployed population or an underemployed population.
Yeah.
There will never be full employment within capitalism.
Yeah.
And that's not because we don't have streets that need to be fixed and, potholes that need to be filled. It's because capital needs a reserve army of labor, as Marx called it, to call upon if the currently employed labor population revolts or goes on strike or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? So they need to have like a backup labor population in case their actively engaged population revolts.
Yeah.
But the problem is there's this, population of people who are not directly involved in production. They're not actually doing anything useful to society. They're not pulling resources out of the ground or growing food or manufacturing the goods we use or whatever, right? So what do you do with them? And Spitzer's argument that crime is the solution, particularly in the U.S. context, that they use to deal with this population. And it's of course the obvious way is by locking people up and getting rid of them, but you can't get rid of everybody. The more effective way is by employing them because crime exists. Now of course it's obvious, like some people are employed in crime, selling drugs or whatever.
Yeah.
But if crime didn't exist, neither would cops.
Also,
right?
I think it's like this huge population that goes to the military, So
same population.
Same people, all these people go to the military.
It's the working class,
they come
surplus
back,
labor
half
population.
Crazy.
Yeah.
You got to give them a job because they're able-bodied men, they have military experience.
Yeah.
And they could be
So
a real
law
threat.
enforcement absorbs this surplus labor population,
That are
Half the
trained
surplus
to-
labor population is employed as criminals and the other half are employed as police officers.
It does make a lot of
and
sense.
prison guards and stuff. And the thing is, these people come from the same neighborhoods, the same communities, and even the same families. Like we were talking earlier about my best friend, I won't say his name online and blow him up, but my best friend is a gang member who got jumped into his head when he was 12 years old and did 18 or 20 years in prison, and the whole was in the SHU program, solitary confinement and all that. And he has another brother who's a gang member too, from a rival gang actually. And then they have 3 brothers that are cops. And they all, none of them get along, there's no family holidays. Even my friend was living with his mom after he passed away, or after he got out of prison before she passed away. Rest in peace, she was a wonderful woman. And his fucking brothers wouldn't even come to see their own mom because he was living there. It's crazy.
It makes me kind of think about your book, Divide and Conquer, where, you talk about different, races and gangs and conflict, but it's also, like you said, these families, some people, they support the state and they reproduce the oppression that their communities are impacted by.
Think of how many families, in the U.S., here in Mexico, wherever, are able to put food on their table and a roof over their head because they're either committing crimes or they're chasing people who do.
An immense amount.
Right?
An incredible amount.
How would the economy of any country absorb that many people if not for that?
Now
That's the problem. What if that population wasn't cops and criminals? What would they be?
So
they'd be a guerrilla army coming for the top.
oligarchs?
Yeah, building a guillotine out in the fucking plaza is what they'd be doing.
So that's something you mentioned in your book, your last chapter. It's this imaginary state. What if gangs were not fighting each other? What if they were? And you mentioned also all these people who are involved in the criminal justice system. What if they weren't doing that? What if they were focused on, the systemic pressure, the systemic oppression, our communities?
What if they weren't absorbed into the economy of crime?
Yeah.
And instead were destitute, like many people are.
Yeah.
Right? There'd be a much larger population of desperate, destitute people who are men of military age possibly with military training. You know what I'm saying? That is a clear and existential threat to the oligarchy of every country. Right? What do they do with what do you do with a population of men in their 20s and 30s who could potentially revolt against the ruling class? In the Middle Ages, they sent them off on crusade. Right? But in a capitalist economy, what do you do? This is the solution that capital came up with.
But I was thinking, if people were to revolt, that would mean that they would have to have some type of consciousness.
Some type of political consciousness, yes, which would be a lot easier to acquire if you're destitute and
You can study.
if you're a cop, you're being brainwashed every day with the propaganda of your job, and if you're a criminal, then your focus is on making money to put food on your table. There's not really a lot of room anywhere there to be reading, political theory or history or any of the kind of things that we read.
So what do you think could be done? So there's this movement now for education for incarcerated, formerly incarcerated people. There's also been politics before Trump to make community colleges more available. Is education the actual path, or what should be done?
Yeah,
Or is there no way to
I
really
hope a
prescribe?
revolution happens someday, or we're all going to fucking perish. I'm not holding my breath for it. I can't say that I'm an anarchist, because in order to be an anarchist, you have to have hope that people are going to rise up and seize their freedom. I don't think they are. I think, especially in America, people are going to march right to their fucking doom like a pack of lemmings. But, in the meantime, we need to try to save as many people as we can and to improve people's lives as best as we can. And so, these, prison education and educating formerly incarcerated people, and, this is really a reformist movement. This is a reformist movement to shore up capital, to prevent this population, potentially problematic population from achieving their potential.
So you
Right.
think it's like they're trying to tame them, giving a little...
Yeah, of course. I'm the only professor on my campus who's actually a penologist, who's published about prison issues in prison journals.
Yeah.
Right. I'm the only professor on my campus who's banned from teaching in our prison education program. Right. They're being propagandized, same as the cops are. They're what they're allowed to read and what classes they're allowed to take and who they're allowed to take them with is being tightly controlled. That's clearly a counterinsurgency operation.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what prison education and, educating people returning from prison is. Now, there's always the possibility, which has happened in the past, that people in prison or people who've been to prison could find the wrong literature and be politicized by it. Right? And, certainly like during the civil rights movement era.
In the 1960s.
In the 60s and the 70s, inmate organizations, became very politicized, just as people on the street were being politicized at the time, right? So there's always that possibility. You never know. I would say you never know what you plant a seed, and you never know which pot it's going to start growing in.
Okay.
You send someone a book, and it might make something click in their mind and change their life. That's what happened for me. I read a book.
What book?
And actually, there's two books I can point to. One book that made me a liberal, or whatever, that I read in undergrad, which was Elliot Curry's Crime and Punishment.
Okay.
And that book, he's talking about the injustice of the criminal justice system and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And me and all my friends had been through it, so it appealed to me.
Yeah.
But it's Elliot, I love him, for God bless his heart. He's a wonderful man, but his position is a reformist one, right?
Yeah.
He wants to reform the system to make it, not quite as onerous, a little bit less draconian.
Yeah.
Actually not even in grad school. In grad school, I'd never heard the name. It's funny, I found this literature on Facebook of all places. Someone, back in the day when there were all these pages that weren't being policed and, the algorithm wasn't, erasing them from existence, there were anarchist pages that were posting whatever. And one of these pages posted a meme with a Bakunin quote and a picture of Mikhail Bakunin. And he's a really imposing, he was 6'4", 6'6", and 300 pounds, and his hands were big enough that he could palm someone's head and pick them up and whatever. And so I saw the meme with the quote, and I forgot what the quote was, but I liked it. And I was like, damn, who's that? Who's Mikhail Bakunin? I never heard of this fucking guy. So I'd been through fucking, I had a PhD at that point, and I'd never heard this fucking name before.
Yeah.
So I Googled it.
Oh, so you were not radicalized until you left?
Yeah, I wasn't radicalized in grad school.
Okay.
Professors control what you read in grad school.
So you were a liberal.
I was, when I started grad school, I'd say I was a liberal. Like I was all for the Democratic Party, you know. I voted for Obama the first time around, and I believed in it, you know. And then I think I was reading like Marxist theory or something. I became like a Marxist, like really a Trotskyist was kind of my perspective at that time, because that's all I had read at the time.
That's pretty radical.
There's a couple of professors at NYU who are well-known Marxist scholars, and so they actually intimidated me out of taking their class. One of them, but I ended up like finding that literature. I ended up reading the literature anyways, regardless of the class. And so you know, if that's all the radical literature you've ever read, then you're going to think that it's, you know, makes a lot of sense. It wasn't until later that I read more history and more theory and more literature and realized that Trotsky was a piece of shit. He got what he deserved. Karma will find you. So I Googled Bakunin, and I think I just read like the Wikipedia, and like he had a really colorful life. Like he was traveling all over Europe trying to fucking start revolutions and assassinate fucking heads of state, and like he was like the real deal, you know. He wasn't just writing books. Like he was out there, like, and he kept getting arrested in these like revolutionary attempts, whatever. And he spent, you know, over 10 years in prison, in the worst prison in the world, the Peter and Paul Fortress in Russia, and all the shit. So I was like, yeah, this dude seems pretty fucking, this dude's pretty sick, you know, like just reading the fucking Wikipedia. So I looked up like what books has this dude written, and the first one I came across, which is I think arguably his magnum opus, is Statism and Anarchy.
Okay.
And I read that, and it's not an easy read, you know. 19th century, you know, political theory is, you know, is dense, I guess is the way to say it. But I got everything he was fucking saying, and it like spoke to all my experiences and like all my reservations about like identity politics and nationalism and patriotism, and also like at that point I was identifying as like some kind of Marxist, but all the critiques of Marx, I was like, wow, like I can't think of a fucking comeback to like what this dude's saying, like he's right, you know. And so then I started reading, I think I read God in the State, which was the book he was writing when he passed away. He never finished. And then I realized, well, you know, there's all these other like theorists that I've never heard of. And so I just like started at the beginning and like started reading like Saint-Simon and who else? I'm so old, I'm going blank already. Like the early 19th century, you know, pre-socialist theorists, and then like through Proudhon and Bakunin and Kropotkin and Goldman and Stirner, and there's so many, Malatesta, and you know, and I just don't have the memory anymore, but I have all these books at home and I've read them all. And so I just like systematically, chronologically started at the beginning of socialist theory.
And this is something you just did by yourself?
Just for fun, while my first 2 years of tenure track employment were spent reading through history, and not just like anarchist theory, but also like I was reading a lot of history, like history of capitalism, history of the race concept, history of nationalism. And because of my interest in nationalism, I was reading a lot of linguistics, like understanding how the role the language plays and the idea that people have, you know, discrete identities and so forth. So I just had this like intellectual curiosity and appetite for, you know, information. And once I figured out, you know, that's really what a PhD is, right? A PhD is the ability to go out and learn about anything on your own.
Yeah.
Right? To be able to figure out what's the research on any particular topic, find what are the different conflicting viewpoints, who are the major scholars in the field, and then just to start at the first thing they ever wrote and chronologically read through the whole fucking literature. And that's what I did. And that's what I do with all literatures, you know, like that's what I did with the gang literature when I was in grad school, and that's what I did with the Marxist literature and the anarchist literature and the history of, you know, capitalism and the race concept and nationalism. I just get every fucking book I can ever find, every piece of literature that I can find on a topic, and I just start at the oldest one and read chronologically through it all.
So your book, Divide and Conquer, is definitely different than your thesis.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a good example. Maybe we should bring this up in the class we're teaching right now, of the difference between data and analysis.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same data, like the same interview content was used in my book that I had access to in my dissertation.
Yeah.
Now, not very much of what was in my dissertation actually made it in the book. The book actually is like a complete rewrite of my dissertation with some chapters removed and a number of additional chapters added on.
Oh, okay.
But more importantly, the analysis is completely different, right? Like, really, my dissertation was like, kind of standard criminology. I really didn't have an analysis. Like, just thinking off the top of my head, like, I can't even verbalize what the fuck my analysis was for my dissertation. What was the analysis for my dissertation? I don't know, because I didn't know at the time, and like, at that time, I didn't have the literature. Grad students haven't read enough literature, even when they've gotten their PhD, to really be able to come up with the type of analysis they do mid-career or later in their career. And at that time, I just hadn't read enough yet to really be capable of conceiving an analysis and a theoretical framework to make sense of the data that I had produced.
Okay. So you come out with this book, Divide and Conquer, and now you're working with me here in Mexico, and you're going to continue that, build off of that book, but with this project here in Mexico. Tell me a little bit about you being here.
Which project? The one I'm doing with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, so the book that I'm working on now, which I've started. I have a handful of interviews, and I need to do a whole lot more. Is kind of, comes out of like my perspective from my first book, Divide and Conquer, and the other stuff that the articles I've published and stuff like that. But also is a product of my experiences working as an expert witness in the courts. I work as an expert witness in criminal cases involving gang allegations, both at the state and federal level, and I've worked all over the country, mostly in Los Angeles and California, but I've worked all over the country. Like in the way the laws are written and the way cases are tried and the narratives that are built are that gangs are incorrigibly negativistic actors who there's no redeeming qualities, there's nothing positive about gangs. Gangs are only negative, and the only reason gangs exist is to commit crimes. And so anybody who has anything to do with gangs is a criminal just by virtue of being associated or affiliated with a gang, because the only reason for being in a gang is to commit crimes. If you can see the circularity of this logic. Yeah. This wouldn't pass an undergrad critical thinking logics class, would it? But that's that's the routine narrative in court. Yeah. And so I was thinking, like, from my own experience and from everyone, I know people from like so many fucking different hoods in LA, like not just Southsiders, Crips, Bloods, like everything. Like, I know people all over fucking town, and I'm very close with a lot of people from a lot of different neighborhoods, which is kind of weird for when people go to prison, they start to make friends with people from different neighborhoods, but growing up, most people kind of stay in their own neighborhood, and also because of the graffiti thing, like people know who I am because of the graffiti thing. And because graffiti writers want to go into different parts of the city and paint everywhere, like I would end up making friends in different places and stuff. So, so I just know a lot of different people, and I know that, like, most of what gang members do is pro-social behavior, not antisocial behavior. And in fact, much of the antisocial behavior is, gang members dislike it as much as the rest of the public. They may have a different way of going about, solving it, but, most of, and the reason people get into gangs in the first place is, you know, our society and our communities and our school system and, you know, and our families too are just not giving kids what they need. And so if kids aren't getting what they need from school and the community and at home from their family, then they're going to go out in the streets and find it. And, you know, and that's what gangs are. Gangs are kind of like, it's like that book, The Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
You know, you have a bunch of kids that are all don't have anywhere to turn and, you know, are yearning for something in their life, and they find each other, you know, and they create the community that they don't have on the outside. They give each other the support
I think that's
that
really
they weren't
important.
getting from school and their community and their parents.
So that is kind of innovative in the sense that you're going to talk about your focus on the community within gangs.
Yeah, and you know, like really, I'm really focused on all of the pro-social behavior that gang members engage in, and the sense of community that being a gang member provides. The tentative title for the book is "The Gang as Community," right?
Okay.
Because that's what a gang is. A gang is a community, and you know, whether everyone in a community is actually a member of a gang, the gang is part of the community. Everybody, you know, like the neighborhood I was living in East LA. I won't name it because I don't want to, you know, blow anybody up, but everybody in that community knows each other. Everybody goes to the same elementary schools, middle school together. Everybody plays little leagues together. Everybody's kids grow up together. Half these motherfuckers are married to each other's sisters and cousins. You know, like it's a community. You know, and there's members of everybody's family who are not members of the gang, but everyone's still a member. It's one big community. You know. Now the police might call everyone gang members and gang associates and whatever, and people who are gang members may or may not engage in antisocial behavior at particular junctures in their life. You know, typically when we're younger, we engage in bad behavior, right? But as people get older, you know, at some point in their life, people change and, you know, start to, you know, engage in more pro-social behavior.
So
or at least leave the antisocial behavior behind.
Do you think gangs could be